The cheap window AC unit rattled, fighting a losing battle against the muggy Chicago summer night. Wyatt lay perfectly still, the exhaustion of a 14-hour shift at the warehouse sitting heavy in his bones. Beside him, the mattress shifted. Savannah slipped out from under the faded sheets, her bare feet padding softly against the linoleum floor. Wyatt kept his eyes closed, his breathing even, assuming she was just going for a glass of water. But then came the soft click of the bathroom door, followed by a sliver of light bleeding into the hallway. Through the paper-thin drywall of their cramped apartment, Wyatt heard the low, breathless murmur of her voice. "I know. I can't wait either. He's dead asleep, Tyler. He worked a double today. He's so oblivious it's pathetic." A cold spike of adrenaline pierced through Wyatt's exhaustion. Tyler, his shift manager, the man who had docked his pay last week for being 3 minutes late. In the dark, Wyatt's calloused hands curled into fists, the cheap gold of his wedding band biting into his skin. If stories of raw betrayal, quiet storms, and the devastating price of revenge speak to your soul, stay with me. The persistent, rhythmic thud of the old AC unit was usually the only lullaby Wyatt James needed. After 14 hours of wrestling wooden pallets and operating a rusted forklift at Carter Industries, his body was a map of aches. His lower back throbbed with a dull, familiar heat, and his hands, calloused and stained with grease that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove, rested heavily on the faded cotton sheets. It was 2:15 a.m. in their cramped unit at the Riverside Apartments. The air inside felt thick, smelling faintly of old cooking oil from the neighbor's kitchen and the vanilla lotion Savannah always wore. Wyatt was drifting in the liminal space between exhaustion and deep sleep when the mattress groaned. He didn't open his eyes. 6 years of marriage had taught him the subtle rhythms of his wife. Savannah was a restless sleeper, especially after a long day on her feet waiting tables at the Sunrise Cafe. He assumed she was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water, or maybe to check if she had locked the deadbolt. But her footsteps didn't head toward the kitchen. They padded softly, almost hesitantly, across the cheap linoleum, stopping at the bathroom. The door clicked shut, a sound so quiet it was clearly meant to go unheard. A thin slice of yellow light bled out from beneath the door frame, stretching across the dark hallway and barely touching the edge of the bed. Wyatt kept his breathing slow and steady, a practiced habit from years of trying not to wake her when he came home from the graveyard shift. He was about to let sleep claim him again when he heard the voice. It wasn't the sharp, exhausted tone Savannah used when they argued about the overdue electric bill. It was a hushed, breathless sound, laced with an intimacy that made Wyatt's chest tighten. Through the paper-thin drywall, her words vibrated into the silent apartment. "I know. I can't wait either," Savannah murmured. There was a soft, genuine laugh, a sound Wyatt hadn't heard directed at him in months. "He's dead asleep, Tyler. He worked a double today. He's so oblivious it's pathetic." Wyatt's heart stopped. The blood in his veins seemed to turn into ice water. Tyler. The name echoed in his skull, deafening over the rattle of the air conditioner. Tyler Black. The slick, arrogant shift manager at the warehouse. The man who wore clean, pressed polos while Wyatt sweat through his canvas shirts. The man who, just 3 days ago, had threatened to dock Wyatt's pay for taking an extra 5 minutes on his lunch break because his truck wouldn't start. "I can't do this much longer," Savannah's voice continued, a petulant whine creeping into her tone. "The smell of this apartment, the constant counting of pennies. He thinks buying me a cheap burger on Friday is a treat. I want what we talked about. I want to get out of here." Wyatt lay paralyzed in the dark. His hand, resting on the mattress, slowly curled into a fist. The cheap gold of his wedding band dug painfully into the flesh of his adjacent finger. He felt a physical nausea rise in his throat, a sickening blend of betrayal and profound humiliation. She wasn't just sleeping with another man. She was sleeping with the man who held the boot to Wyatt's neck every night. She was mocking the very sweat he poured out to keep the roof over her head. He heard the faint sound of a kiss being blown through the phone's receiver. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "before his shift, I'll meet you at the usual place. Love you." The toilet flushed, a calculated cover noise. The light clicked off, and the bathroom door opened. Wyatt immediately relaxed his muscles, letting his mouth fall open slightly, feigning the heavy, rhythmic breathing of a man dead to the world. Savannah slipped back into bed, the mattress sinking under her weight. She pulled the sheet up, her back turned to him, the faint scent of vanilla washing over him. Wyatt stared into the suffocating darkness of the bedroom. A hot, silent tear escaped the corner of his eye, tracking down his temple and soaking into the cheap pillowcase. But as the tear fell, the sorrow within him crystallized. The man who had gone to sleep an hour ago was dead. In his place, something cold, sharp, and patient was waking up. The morning sun crawled through the dusty blinds of the riverside apartment, casting harsh, geometric shadows across the linoleum floor. Wyatt hadn't slept a single minute. He had spent the remaining hours of the night staring at the water stain on the ceiling, tracing its edges as if it held the map to a new reality. When the cheap plastic alarm clock on the nightstand finally buzzed at 7, he reached out and silenced it with a heavy, practiced hand. Savannah stirred beside him, a soft groan escaping her lips as she stretched. "Morning," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. The same voice that, mere hours ago, had sharply cut through his dignity in the dark. "Morning," Wyatt replied. His voice was a dry rasp. It took every ounce of willpower in his exhausted body not to flinch when she casually rested a hand on his chest before slipping out of bed. He dragged himself to the kitchen, the chill of the floorboards seeping into his bare feet. The apartment felt different today. It wasn't just small and run down anymore. It was a crime scene. Every chipped mug, every unpaid bill pinned to the refrigerator, every scuff mark on the wall was a testament to the life she found so utterly repulsive. Savannah was already at the counter, tying the apron of her Sunrise Cafe uniform over her waist. The yellow fabric was cheerful, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension Wyatt felt binding his lungs. She poured steaming black coffee into his favorite mug, a chipped ceramic thing he had gotten from a hardware store opening years ago. "You look dead on your feet, W.Y.," she said, sliding the mug across the scratched Formica counter. Her eyes, a pale, clear blue, met his with an expression of practiced, domestic concern. "They working you to the bone again?" Wyatt wrapped his calloused hands around the hot porcelain, letting the heat burn his palms to ground himself. He stared into her eyes, searching for a flicker of guilt, a micro-expression of the contempt she had voiced to Tyler. There was nothing. She was perfectly, flawlessly ordinary. "Just a long shift," Wyatt muttered, taking a sip of the bitter, cheap coffee. It tasted like ash in his mouth. "Tyler had us rearranging the heavy freight in Sector 4. Took longer than expected." He deliberately dropped Tyler's name into the quiet space between them. For a fraction of a second, the rhythm of Savannah's hands smoothing her apron faltered. A microscopic hesitation. Then, she turned her back to him, reaching for her purse. "Well, that guy's always been a jerk," she said smoothly, her tone dismissive. "You shouldn't let him walk all over you. You work harder than anyone there." The sheer audacity of the lie hit Wyatt like a physical blow to the sternum. She was comforting him. She was playing the supportive wife of a blue-collar worker while actively planning to use his hard-earned money to pay off her car before abandoning him for the very man making his life hell. The dilemma tore at his insides. A primal part of him wanted to hurl the hot coffee against the wall, to scream her words from last night back into her face, to shatter the porcelain mask she wore so easily. But the cold, rational survivor that had awakened in him at 2:15 a.m. held him back. If he confronted her now, she would cry, play the victim, or worse, warned Tyler. Wyatt would lose his job, his meager savings, and the only advantage he currently possessed. "I just do my job, Save," Wyatt said quietly, his gaze dropping to the dark liquid in his cup. "We need the money." Savannah walked over and pressed a brief, perfunctory kiss to the crown of his head. He held his breath to avoid smelling the vanilla lotion. "I know we do. I gotta run. The diner gets packed by 8, she said, grabbing her keys. "Have a good sleep today. Love you." "Love you too," Wyatt echoed, the words tasting like pennies and blood. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Wyatt alone in the oppressive silence of the kitchen. The mask of normalcy was set, and the quiet war had officially begun. The fluorescent lights of Carter Industries buzzed with a relentless, mechanical hum, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the concrete floor. It was 10 o'clock at night, the start of the graveyard shift. Dust motes danced in the heavy, stagnant air, thick with the smell of diesel exhaust, damp cardboard, and stale sweat. Wyatt sat in the driver's seat of his battered yellow forklift, the engine idling beneath him in a low vibration. His knuckles were bone white as he gripped the steering wheel. Normally, the grueling physical labor was a numbing comfort, a way to switch off his brain and just push through until dawn. Tonight, however, every sensory input was magnified. Every clank of metal sounded like a taunt. Every shadow felt like a secret. "James, you're daydreaming on company time." The voice cut through the industrial din, sharp and dripping with unearned superiority. Wyatt slowly turned his head. Tyler Black stood at the edge of the loading dock, a pristine clipboard tucked under his arm. Tyler wore a crisp, light blue polo shirt that seemed entirely immune to the warehouse grime. His dark hair perfectly styled, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He looked like a man who had spent his afternoon in a comfortable, air-conditioned hotel room, not a man managing a night crew of exhausted laborers. Wyatt's stomach contracted into a tight, hard knot. This was the man, the voice on the other end of the phone, the reason Savannah found their life pathetic. Looking at Tyler now, Wyatt didn't just see a demanding boss. He saw a thief who had stolen the only thing Wyatt possessed of any value. "Just checking the hydraulic pressure," Wyatt lied, his voice flat, completely devoid of the tired deference he usually forced himself to muster. Tyler's smirk widened slightly, a patronizing curve. He walked over, his polished boots clicking distinctly against the concrete. "Sure you are. Listen, I need you to move the pallid electronics from Sector 4 over to the quarantine bay in Sector 9. By yourself." Cooper called out sick. Sector 9 was the furthest, darkest corner of the vast warehouse, an area notoriously plagued by blown bulbs and broken security cameras. It was backbreaking, solitary work meant for a two-man team. "Quarantine?" Wyatt asked, keeping his gaze fixed on Tyler's collar, noticing a faint, flushed mark near the neckline. "Those are brand new shipments. High-end audio gear. They're marked as damaged goods, James," Tyler snapped, the thin facade of corporate patience slipping immediately. He tapped the clipboard with a silver pen. "Water damage on the truck. Corporate wants them isolated before they're written off. Do you have a problem following protocol, or do I need to find someone else who actually wants a paycheck?" The threat dangled in the dusty air, heavy and blunt. Wyatt felt the familiar, blinding heat of rage flare in his chest, urging him to step off the forklift and wrap his grease-stained hands around Tyler's immaculate throat. He could crush the smirk right off his face. It would take seconds, but seconds of satisfaction would cost him everything. Savannah would be free to play the grieving, terrified victim. Tyler would press charges and play the martyr. Wyatt would lose his job, his freedom, and his vengeance. Swallowing the metallic taste of bile in his throat, Wyatt shifted the forklift into gear. "No problem, Tyler. I'll get it done." "Good man," Tyler said, turning on his heel. "Make sure you log them properly on the secondary manifest, not the primary. I don't want the main system cluttered with garbage." Wyatt watched Tyler walk away, retreating toward the elevated, glass-walled office overlooking the floor. A cold, sharp realization began to thread through Wyatt's anger, chilling his blood. Secondary manifest. Damaged high-value goods. Sector 9 blind spots. Tyler wasn't just stealing Wyatt's wife. The arrogant bastard was stealing from Carter Industries. Wyatt eased the forklift forward, the heavy steel forks sliding smoothly under the first pallet of supposedly ruined electronics. He had spent 6 years blindly following orders, keeping his head down and his mouth shut. But as he drove toward the shadows of Sector 9, Wyatt knew he was no longer just a disposable employee. He was a predator, and Tyler had just shown him his bleeding throat. The late afternoon sun baked the small living room of the Riverside apartment, trapping the stale, humid air inside. Wyatt sat on the edge of the sagging sofa, a cold, untouched beer resting against his thigh. He was supposed to be sleeping before his next graveyard shift, but his mind was a jagged landscape of suspicion and strategy. At 4:15 p.m., the front door rattled. Savannah pushed it open, kicking off her worn white sneakers with a heavy, dramatic sigh. She looked the part of the exhausted waitress flawlessly, her blonde hair pulled back into a messy bun, the yellow Sunrise Cafe apron stained with a smear of ketchup and something that looked like dried gravy. "Hey," she said, dropping her keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. "We got slammed after the lunch rush. I am completely dead." "Hey," Wyatt replied, his voice a carefully calibrated monotone. He stood up, walking over to take her apron as he always did, playing the dutiful, caring husband. As he leaned in to untie the knot at her waist, the air between them shifted. The Sunrise Cafe always left its distinct mark on Savannah, a greasy, heavy scent of fried onions, industrial bleach, and burnt coffee. But beneath that familiar grime, clinging stubbornly to the collar of her shirt and the skin of her neck, was something else entirely. A sharp, crisp note of sandalwood and bergamot. Wyatt knew that smell. It was the same expensive, overpowering cologne that trailed behind Tyler Black on the warehouse floor, a scent deliberately chosen to assert dominance over the smell of diesel and working-class sweat. Wyatt's jaw tightened so hard his teeth ached, but he forced his hands to smoothly pull the apron away. "You should take a shower. Wash the grease off." "God, yes. I feel disgusting," Savannah groaned, rubbing her neck right where the scent of Tyler's cologne was strongest. "Don't wait up. You need to sleep." She disappeared down the short hallway. A minute later, the old plumbing groaned, and the steady hiss of the shower echoed through the thin walls of the apartment. The moment the water hit the cheap fiberglass tub, Wyatt moved. His lethargy vanished, replaced by a terrifying, cold-blooded focus. He didn't bother checking her purse on the counter. Savannah was calculating. She wouldn't leave a loaded gun in plain sight. He went straight to their small bedroom closet. The closet was a cramped, dark space smelling of mothballs and old shoes. Wyatt pushed past his stiff canvas work jackets and her floral summer dresses, reaching the dusty back corner where they kept their winter gear. It was mid-August. There was absolutely no reason for Savannah to touch her heavy, navy blue wool coat. He ran his grease-stained hands over the thick fabric, patting down the sides with the frantic precision of a man defusing a bomb. Nothing in the left pocket. He moved to the right. His fingers brushed against something hard, flat, and rectangular, hidden deep within the torn silk lining. Wyatt pulled it out. It was a cheap, black prepaid smartphone. The kind you bought with cash at a corner liquor store to avoid a paper trail. He stared at the plastic device resting in his scarred palm. It felt heavier than a block of lead. This was the lifeline of her betrayal, the secret conduit through which she mocked his poverty and planned her escape. The screen was black, but its mere existence was all the proof he needed. He didn't need to unlock it right now to know the poison it contained. The device itself was a screaming confession. Suddenly, the shower down the hall squeaked off. The pipes shuddered into silence. Wyatt's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He shoved the burner phone deep back into the wool coat's pocket, meticulously ensuring the torn lining sat exactly as he had found it. He closed the closet door with a quiet click and stepped backward, grabbing a folded gray t-shirt from the dresser just as the bathroom door creaked open. Savannah emerged, wrapped in a white towel, her skin flushed and smelling of cheap strawberry body wash. The bergamot was gone, washed down the drain like a dirty secret. "You're still up?" she asked, wiping condensation from her eyes. "Just grabbing a clean shirt," Wyatt lied, his voice perfectly steady, though the phantom weight of the black plastic phone still burned into his palm. "Going to sleep now." The following afternoon, the Riverside apartment was suffocatingly quiet, filled only by the mechanical hum of the aging refrigerator. Savannah had left for the diner an hour ago, complaining about a headache and the impending lunch rush. Wyatt stood alone in the bedroom before the open closet, the heavy smell of mothballs mixing with the stale, trapped heat of the room. He reached deep into the dark corner, his fingers finding the torn silk lining of the navy blue winter coat. He pulled out the black plastic rectangle. He pressed the power button. The cheap screen flickered to life, casting a sickly, pale blue glare over his calloused, grease-stained fingers. There was no passcode, a fatal error born of Savannah's absolute, arrogant confidence in his blind trust. Wyatt opened the messaging app. There was only one active thread, the contact saved simply as T. His thumb hovered over the glass for a fraction of a second before he dragged it downward, scrolling back through time. Days, weeks, and then months of text bubbles flew past, an overwhelming digital archive of his own humiliation. He stopped at a cluster of messages from late May, exactly around the time Savannah had started complaining more bitterly about their finances. T. Did you tell him about the overtime? Savannah. Yeah. He's taking the weekend shifts now. If he keeps it up, that should cover the rest of the Honda's loan by late October. T. Good. Once the title is clear in your name, we sell it. We'll need the cash for the deposit on the Meridian apartment. I can't keep sneaking around the Archer Hotel. Savannah. I know, baby. I'm so sick of this dump. And he always smells like diesel when he comes home. I just have to play the part a little longer. It'll be worth it. Wyatt read the words again. And again. He didn't cry. The single, silent tear he had shed 2 nights ago in the dark was the last piece of grief he would ever waste on this woman. Instead, a profound, terrifying numbness settled over his chest, freezing the marrow in his bones. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It wasn't a crime of passion born out of marital neglect. It was a cold, calculated, parasitic extraction. She was letting him break his back on the concrete floor of Carter Industries, destroying his joints and sacrificing his sleep, entirely to finance her getaway. She was weaponizing his love and his sense of duty to buy her freedom, planning to use the car he was paying for as the down payment on a new life with the very man who held a boot to Wyatt's neck every night. Operating with a strange, detached calm, Wyatt pulled his own cracked smartphone from his pocket. Methodically, with hands that were now perfectly steady, he began photographing the screen of the burner phone. Every damning exchange, every cruel joke about his meager paycheck, every timestamp of their secret hotel rendezvous. He documented the complete autopsy of his 6-year marriage, reducing his heartbreak to a series of digital image files. When he reached the most recent message, he held the power button down until the screen went black. He meticulously wiped his fingerprints from the cheap plastic casing with the hem of his shirt. He slid the device back into the tear in the wool coat's lining, adjusting the fabric until it lay perfectly, innocently undisturbed. The devoted husband who had worked double shifts to buy her that coat 3 winters ago was completely gone. The man who walked out of the bedroom and into the suffocating heat of the living room was something else entirely. He was a man with nothing left to lose, quietly gathering the kindling to burn their entire world to the ground. The graveyard shift at Carter Industries was a symphony of industrial noise. The piercing backup beepers of forklifts, the violent slam of metal dock plates, and the heavy thud of dropped freight. Wyatt drove his battered yellow lift towards Sector 9, the darkest and most neglected corner of the sprawling warehouse. This was the quarantine bay, a designated graveyard for damaged goods waiting to be written off and destroyed. Tyler's arrogant orders echoed in Wyatt's mind over the engine's roar. Water damage on the truck. Secondary manifest. Don't clutter the main system. Wyatt lowered the steel forks, dropping the heavy pallet of high-end audio receivers onto the cracked concrete. The overhead fluorescent bulb flickered ominously, casting erratic, stretching shadows over the tower of cardboard boxes. Wyatt stepped off the lift, the soles of his boots sticking slightly to a patch of old, dried hydraulic fluid. He approached the shrink-wrapped stack. He ran his calloused, bare hand over the tight plastic film. It was perfectly dry. He crouched down, inspecting the bottom corners of the lowest cardboard boxes, looking for the telltale warping, discoloration, and structural weakness that accompanied severe water damage. There was absolutely nothing. The packaging was immaculate. These were brand new units, premium electronics retailing for over $2,000 apiece. A cold, predatory thrill pulsed through Wyatt's veins, momentarily overriding the exhaustion in his bones. He wasn't just dealing with an arrogant manager sleeping with his wife. He was dealing with a remarkably sloppy thief. Glancing over his shoulder to ensure the long aisle was empty, Wyatt pulled a rusted box cutter from his heavy canvas pocket and sliced a tiny, imperceptible slit into the plastic wrap. He pulled out his handheld inventory scanner and aimed a red laser at the barcode on the side of the top box. The screen beeped softly, glowing green in the dim light. Item status: quarantined, pending destruction. Logged by T. Black. Wyatt's jaw tightened. He backed out of the immediate status screen and accessed the primary shipping manifest, the very system Tyler had explicitly told him to avoid. He typed in the original purchase order number from the shipping label. The primary system loaded, showing the entire shipment as successfully received, undamaged, and stocked in Sector 4. Tyler had created a phantom discrepancy, meticulously duplicating and altering the paperwork. In the official corporate system, these units were perfectly fine and sitting on a shelf for sale. In Tyler's private, localized secondary manifest, they were garbage waiting to be thrown in a dumpster. Or, more accurately, waiting to be loaded into the back of Tyler's personal truck under the cover of darkness. This wasn't a minor fireable offense. This was a felony. Grand larceny. The pieces of the sickening puzzle slammed together with crystal clarity. Tyler and Savannah needed a massive influx of cash for the deposit on the luxury Meridian apartment they had texted about. They were using Wyatt's backbreaking overtime to pay off Savannah's Honda, and Tyler was fencing stolen, high-end electronics to fund the rest of their grand escape. Wyatt pulled his cracked smartphone from his pocket. His hands, which usually trembled from the sheer physical strain of the shift, were steady as carved stone. He photographed the pristine boxes, the serial numbers, and the conflicting screens on his inventory scanner. He stepped back and documented the blind spot created by a conveniently bumped security camera that was now pointing at the corrugated steel ceiling instead of the quarantine bay. He was building a cage, steel bar by steel bar. Suddenly, the heavy echo of boots sounded at the far end of the concrete aisle. Wyatt swiftly pocketed his phone, holstered his scanner, and grabbed a roll of industrial packing tape from the forklift. Brian Cooper, a fellow warehouse worker, rounded the corner, wiping grease and sweat from his forehead with a rag. "Hey, W.I., you stuck in the dead zone tonight?" Wyatt turned, casually slapping a piece of tape over the slit he had cut in the shrink wrap. "Yeah, Tyler wanted these water-damaged units isolated." Brian scoffed loudly, eyeing the perfectly dry boxes. "Water damage? Those look better than the crap we actually ship out. That guy's a moron." "Yeah," Wyatt agreed, his voice a low, gravelly monotone as he climbed back onto the driver's seat of his forklift, staring at the spot where Tyler's career was about to die. "He really is." Thursday afternoon hung heavy and humid over the Chicago suburbs. The Sunrise Cafe was caught in the dead zone between the lunch rush and the early dinner crowd. The bell above the glass door chimed, cutting through the low hum of the neon beer signs in the window. Wyatt stepped inside, the cool blast of the diner's air conditioning hitting his face. Savannah was standing behind the counter, wiping down the sticky Formica surface with a damp rag. Beside her, Megan, a waitress with a name tag pinned crookedly to her apron, was rolling silverware into paper napkins. When Savannah looked up and saw her husband, Wyatt caught the micro-expression, a violent, instantaneous flash of sheer panic, before she quickly buried it under a tight, practiced smile. "Wyatt, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice half an octave higher than usual. "You're supposed to be sleeping before your shift." "Couldn't sleep," Wyatt said easily, sliding into a red vinyl booth in her section. "Thought I'd come see my beautiful wife. Maybe get a slice of that cherry pie." Megan coos from the counter, leaning over. "Ah, Savannah, you didn't tell me he was such a sweetheart. After 6 years, too. You got a good one." Savannah swallowed hard, her throat visibly working. "Yeah, I do." She grabbed a menu and a coffee pot, walking over to his booth. Her movements were stiff, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. She poured the black coffee, her hand trembling just enough to clink the glass pot against the ceramic mug. "You okay, safe?" Wyatt asked, his voice dripping with syrupy, artificial concern. He reached across the table and covered her free hand with his. She instinctively tried to pull away, but Wyatt tightened his grip. It wasn't a painful hold, but it was an anchor, a sudden, heavy assertion of physical presence that locked her in place. "I'm fine," she stammered, glancing nervously back at Megan, who was still smiling at them. "Just tired." "I know," Wyatt said, his thumb slowly, deliberately tracing the knuckles of her hand. His dark eyes locked onto hers, stripping away the diner around them. "But I've been thinking a lot about us lately. About the future. All this overtime I'm pulling. It's finally going to pay off." Savannah's pale blue eyes darted to the left. "That's great. Yeah," Wyatt continued, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble that only she could hear. "The Honda is almost paid off. Just a few more weeks of double shifts. Once that title is clear and in your name, you'll be totally free. You could just pack up and drive away to a brand new apartment if you really wanted to." The blood drained completely from Savannah's face, leaving her skin the color of dirty snow. Her breath hitched. She stared at him, desperately searching his expression for a sign of malice, but Wyatt's face was an impenetrable mask of serene, loving devotion. Why would I do that?" She forced a weak, breathless laugh. "Just saying." Wyatt smiled, finally releasing her hand. He took a slow sip of the scalding coffee. "Freedom is a funny thing. Oh, by the way, Tyler was in a strangely good mood at the warehouse last night. Said something about a big weekend trip coming up soon. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" The damp rag slipped from Savannah's fingers, landing on the floor with a wet slap. "Why would I know anything about your manager's weekend?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "No reason," Wyatt said cheerfully, slicing a piece of the pie Megan had just set down. "Just making conversation. It's crazy, though, isn't it? How people can live double lives right under your nose." He ate the bite of pie, savoring the stark, terrified silence emanating from his wife. He left a crisp $20 bill on the table, far more than the meal cost, and stood up. "See you at home, sweetheart," Wyatt said, turning his back on her. As he pushed through the diner doors and stepped back into the suffocating summer heat, he knew the psychological poison had been successfully administered. She would spend the rest of her shift looking over her shoulder, suffocating on her own guilt. The public library in downtown Chicago was a sanctuary of silence, a stark contrast to the mechanical roar of Carter Industries. It was Friday morning, 9 o'clock. Wyatt sat at a corner computer terminal, his broad shoulders hunched over the stained, plastic keyboard. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a low, steady tune. He pulled a cheap flash drive from his pocket, bought with cash at a gas station 2 days ago, and pushed it into the machine. On the screen, a folder opened. It contained everything. The crisp, high-resolution photographs of the supposedly water-damaged audio receivers, their cardboard packaging pristine and dry. The screenshots of Tyler's localized secondary manifest, directly juxtaposed with the primary corporate logs showing the items as securely stocked. The final image was a clear, undeniable shot of the security camera in Sector 9, its lens deliberately tilted upward to film the corrugated steel ceiling instead of the quarantine bay floor. Wyatt opened a web browser and navigated to a secure, encrypted email service. He didn't hesitate. He typed in the address he had memorized from a laminated corporate memo pinned to the warehouse breakroom bulletin board. D. Sterling at Carter Industries. Corp. David Sterling, the regional director of operations. A man known across the company for his ruthless efficiency and absolute zero tolerance for shrinkage. Wyatt's calloused fingers hovered over the keyboard. He typed the subject line, "Urgent, grand larceny in progress, Chicago Riverside Branch." The body of the email was surgical. No emotion, no accusations of infidelity, just cold, hard logistics. "Mr. Sterling, shift manager Tyler Black is systematically embezzling high-value electronics from the Chicago Riverside warehouse. He logs undamaged freight as water damaged on a secondary manifest, and moves them to the unmonitored quarantine bay in Sector 9. He has intentionally blinded camera 4B. Attached is irrefutable photographic evidence. Black is planning a massive extraction of premium audio equipment tonight, Friday, between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. If you send corporate security directly to the loading dock unannounced during this window, you will catch him loading company property into his personal vehicle. Do not contact local branch management. Black has full access to the floor. Proceed with discretion. Wyatt attached the zip file containing the photographs. He stared at the blue send button on the screen. This was the point of no return. Once he clicked it, the avalanche would begin, and there would be no stopping the destruction it would cause. He thought of Savannah's mocking laugh filtering through the drywall. He thought of the agonizing ache in his lower back, the overtime hours stolen from his life to finance his own betrayal. The mouse clicked. The screen flashed. Message sent. Wyatt pulled the flash drive, snapped the cheap plastic casing in half with his thumb, and dropped the pieces into a trash can on his way out into the glaring morning sun. When he returned to the Riverside apartment, the air inside was thick with the smell of cheap hairspray and anticipation. Savannah was in the bedroom, zipping up a small canvas duffel bag. "Hey," she said, looking up with a bright, entirely fabricated smile. "You're home early." "Traffic was light," Wyatt murmured, leaning against the doorframe. He watched her pack a black lace slip he hadn't seen her wear in years. "I'm just getting ready for my girls' weekend at the lake," Savannah chirped, her voice fluttering with nervous excitement. "Megan and the others are picking me up this afternoon. You're sure you'll be okay here alone all weekend?" "I'll be fine, Save," Wyatt said, his voice a low, steady rumble. He looked at the duffel bag, knowing perfectly well it wasn't meant for a rustic lake cabin with coworkers, but for the luxury bed of the Meridian Hotel after Tyler fenced the stolen goods to pay for it. "You just go," Wyatt continued, his eyes locking onto hers with a dark, unreadable calm. "Go and have exactly the weekend you deserve." She beamed, completely oblivious to the steel trap snapping shut around her ankles. "I will. Love you, WICU," Wyatt replied, turning away to let her finish packing for a trip that would never happen. The match was struck. All he had to do now was watch the house burn. The warehouse clock ticked past 1:45 a.m. The air inside Carter Industries was a stifling blend of exhaust fumes and stagnant humidity, but Wyatt James felt nothing but an icy, absolute calm. He navigated his yellow forklift through the main arterial aisle of Sector 4, meticulously stacking pallets of industrial solvent. His movements were entirely automated, the deeply ingrained muscle memory of a man who had sold 6 years of his life to this concrete floor. But his dark eyes were fixed on the deep, shadowy expanse of Sector 9. At the far end of the quarantine bay, a solitary figure moved with frantic, greedy purpose. Tyler Black had discarded his pristine clipboard. He was wrestling a manual pallet jack, his muscles straining under the sheer weight of the high-end audio receivers he had meticulously labeled as water-damaged. Through the open bay doors of loading dock number 7, the sleek black tailgate of Tyler's personal pickup truck was visible, backed flush against the concrete lip, waiting for its stolen payload. Wyatt cut the engine of his forklift. The sudden silence in his immediate vicinity made the distant, desperate scraping of Tyler's pallet jack sound thunderous in the cavernous space. Wyatt leaned back against the worn vinyl seat, crossing his calloused arms over his chest. He was a ghost in the machine, sitting in the shadows, waiting for the final act of a play he had written in the dark. At exactly 2:03 a.m., the trap snapped shut. There was no warning siren, no dramatic announcement over the intercom. There was only the sudden, violent squeal of heavy tires on the asphalt outside. 3 unmarked, black SUVs swarmed the exterior of loading dock 7, their headlights cutting through the muggy night air like blinding blades. The warehouse's industrial doors slammed open, and half a dozen men in dark windbreakers spilled onto the concrete. 2 uniformed local police officers flanked them, their hands resting on their duty belts. Tyler froze. The handle of the pallet jack slipped from his sweaty grip. The heavy load of stolen electronics shifted, crashing down onto the concrete with a deafening thud that echoed across the entire building. Wyatt watched from the darkness of Sector 4 as David Sterling, the regional director of operations, stepped out of the lead vehicle. Even from 100 yards away, the absolute fury radiating from the corporate executive was palpable. Sterling pointed a sharp, accusing finger at the pristine boxes, then directly at Tyler's chest. Panic, raw and pathetic, dissolved Tyler's arrogant posture instantly. He held up his hands, backing away from the pallet jack, his mouth moving frantically as he tried to construct a lie out of thin air. He pointed vaguely toward the forklift aisles, perhaps trying to blame a phantom night crew worker, but the men in windbreakers had already formed an impenetrable perimeter around him. A police officer stepped forward, grabbing Tyler roughly by the shoulder of his crisp blue polo shirt and spinning him around. The metallic click of handcuffs snapping over his wrists was too distant for Wyatt to hear, but the visual was perfectly, beautifully clear. Tyler Black, the man who had mocked Wyatt's poverty and laid claim to his wife, was pressed face first against the side of a shipping container, his immaculate image and his future entirely shattered. Brian Cooper ran up alongside Wyatt's parked lift, his eyes wide with shock, breathless from sprinting across the floor. Holy hell, WY. Are you seeing this? Corporate just raided the dock. They're arresting Tyler. I see it, Wyatt murmured, his voice a flat, deadpan rumble. He didn't smile. He didn't flinch. His expression remained carved from stone. What the hell did he do? Brian gasped, watching as they marched a weeping, pleading Tyler out of the warehouse and shoved him aggressively into the back of a police cruiser. Looks like he tried to take something that didn't belong to him, Wyatt said softly. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers painted the warehouse walls in a frantic, strobe light rhythm, illuminating the heavy dust motes hanging in the air. As the convoy pulled away into the night, taking Tyler's career, his freedom, and his illicit wealth with it, Wyatt reached out and turned the key in his forklift's ignition. The heavy engine roared back to life. Half the cancer had been cut out. Now, he had to go home and excise the rest. The sun was just beginning to bleed a pale, sickly gray over the Chicago skyline when Wyatt parked his rusted truck outside the Riverside apartment complex. The drive home had been entirely silent. The heavy exhaustion that usually plagued him after a graveyard shift was gone, replaced by a hollow, ringing clarity. The warehouse was behind him, a crime scene secured by corporate lawyers and local police. Now, it was time to secure his own. He unlocked the front door and stepped into the cramped living room. The air was stifling. Savannah's canvas duffel bag sat by the door, packed for a luxury weekend that no longer existed. Savannah was sitting on the sagging edge of the sofa. She didn't look up when the door clicked shut. Her knees were pulled to her chest, and her face was buried in her hands. The cheerful, oblivious facade she had worn yesterday was entirely shattered. Her shoulders shook with violent, silent sobs, her blonde hair a tangled mess. Trip get canceled? Wyatt asked. His voice was a low, flat rumble in the quiet room. Savannah jumped, startled by his sudden presence. She dropped her hands, revealing a face streaked with ruined mascara and blotchy, pale skin. She looked at him with wide, terrified eyes, trying desperately to piece her mask back together with trembling hands. Wyatt, she gasped, her voice thick and wet. You're home. Yeah, the girls. Megan got sick. We had to call it off. I had a bad morning. Wyatt didn't blink. He didn't offer a comforting smile or step forward to hold her. He simply stared at her, absorbing the pathetic, desperate lie. He slowly unlaced his heavy steel-toed work boots, kicking them aside. Then, with deliberate, measured steps, he walked past her. He didn't go to the kitchen. He went straight to the hall closet. Savannah watched him, her breath hitching in her throat, a new, sharper kind of panic dawning in her pale blue eyes. Wyatt reached into the dark corner, pushing past the canvas jackets until his calloused fingers found the navy blue winter coat. He slipped his hand into the torn silk lining and pulled out the cheap, black prepaid smartphone. He walked back into the living room and stood over her. The silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by the ragged, shallow sound of her breathing. With a flick of his wrist, Wyatt tossed the burner phone. It landed on the scratched Formica coffee table with a harsh, definitive plastic clack. Savannah stared at the black rectangle as if it were a venomous snake coiled to strike. The last drop of color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a corpse. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I think T left you a message," Wyatt said, his tone entirely conversational, devoid of any anger or sorrow. "You should probably read it." Her trembling hand reached out, hovering over the phone before she finally pressed the power button. The screen lit up. Wyatt had already seen the notification flash on the screen when he pulled it from the coat. A final, frantic text sent from Tyler's personal phone just minutes before his arrest. Wyatt watched her eyes scan the screen. He knew exactly what it said. Tyler, cornered and facing years in a federal penitentiary for grand larceny, had lashed out like a trapped rat. He blamed her. He told her it was over. He told her to lose his number because corporate knew everything and he was going to jail. A choked, agonizing sound escaped Savannah's throat. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the floor. She looked up at Wyatt, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization. She wasn't just looking at the husband she had betrayed. She was looking at the architect of her lover's destruction. "He's not going to the Meridian, Savannah," Wyatt said quietly, the absolute coldness in his voice freezing the humid air between them. "He's going to county lockup, and you're not going anywhere." The silence that followed Wyatt's words was absolute, heavier than the humid Chicago air pressing against the cheap window panes. Savannah stared at him, her chest heaving as the reality of her ruined escape plans settled into her bones. The luxurious future she had sold her soul for was gone, replaced by the grim, fluorescent-lit reality of a county jail cell for Tyler and a devastating, immediate eviction for herself. "Wyatt, please," she choked out, her voice a fragile, pathetic thread. She fell to her knees, the stained linoleum hard against her bare legs. It wasn't what it looked like. I was just so tired. I was so tired of scraping by, of counting every single penny. Look at this place, WY. The peeling paint, the roaches. I just wanted to breathe for a minute." Wyatt looked down at her. 6 years ago, seeing her cry would have torn his heart out. He would have worked 3 jobs just to buy her a smile. Now, looking at the tears streaking through her cheap makeup, he felt nothing but a profound, hollow exhaustion. "You wanted to breathe," Wyatt repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "So you let me suffocate. You let me pull 14-hour shifts, destroying my back on that concrete floor, just so you could use my blood to buy your way into Tyler's bed." "No, that's not true," she sobbed, reaching out to grasp the hem of his canvas work pants. "He manipulated me. He promised things. But I love you, WY. We can fix this. I'll quit the diner. We can start over." Wyatt stepped back, breaking her grip. The physical contact felt sickening. "There is no we anymore, Savannah. There hasn't been since May. I read the texts. I know exactly how pathetic you think I am." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys, detaching the small, silver key fob for the Honda. He tossed it onto the coffee table beside the discarded burner phone. "The car stays," Wyatt commanded, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "I paid the loan. The title is in my name. You're leaving with exactly what you brought into this apartment 6 years ago." Savannah's eyes widened in genuine, unadulterated terror. "Wyatt, you can't do this. I have nowhere to go. Megan barely has room for herself. And Tyler. Tyler is currently being booked for grand larceny," Wyatt interrupted, his voice dropping to a glacial chill. "Corporate caught him red-handed loading stolen freight. I made sure of it." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her jaw slacked, her breath hitching as she stared at the man she thought was just a clueless, exhausted laborer. The realization that Wyatt had orchestrated the entire downfall of her lover shattered the last remnants of her defiance. She was utterly outmatched. The husband she had mocked for being slow and blind had meticulously dismantled her entire world. "Now," Wyatt said, pointing a calloused finger toward the bedroom, "take your duffel bag, pack your clothes, and get out of my house." For a long, agonizing moment, Savannah didn't move. She just knelt there, weeping into her hands, waiting for a reprieve that would never come. But Wyatt remained an immovable statue of cold resolution. Finally, trembling violently, she pushed herself off the floor. She walked into the bedroom like a ghost. Wyatt stood by the front door, listening to the frantic sound of drawers opening and shutting, the zipper of the canvas bag protesting as it was stuffed full. When she emerged 15 minutes later, she looked small, broken, and entirely defeated. She slung the heavy bag over her shoulder, pausing at the threshold. She reached for her left hand and slowly slid the gold wedding band off her finger. She placed it carefully on the edge of the ceramic bowl by the door. "I'm sorry, W.Y.," she whispered to the floor. Wyatt didn't answer. He simply reached out, wrapped his hand around the brass doorknob, and pulled the door open, gesturing to the empty hallway. 2 weeks had passed since the night the corporate SUVs swarmed the loading dock of Carter Industries. The brutal, suffocating heat of the Chicago summer had finally broken, leaving behind a damp, creeping chill that seeped through the floorboards of the rusted Ford truck. Wyatt sat behind the steering wheel, the engine idling with a low, unsteady rumble. He was parked in his usual spot outside the Riverside apartment complex, staring up at the second-floor window of his unit. The window was completely dark. There was no yellow light bleeding through the cheap blinds. There was no shadow of a woman moving across the kitchen, pouring bitter coffee, or tying a yellow diner apron around her waist. The silence emanating from the brick building was absolute, a heavy, suffocating vacuum that pressed against the windshield of his truck. The war was over, and Wyatt had won every single battle. Tyler Black was gone. The slick, arrogant manager had been terminated with extreme prejudice, his pristine reputation instantly obliterated by the undeniable weight of corporate evidence. He was currently sitting in a county holding cell, entirely unable to post the massive bail set for felony grand larceny. The luxury Meridian apartment he had promised Savannah was nothing but a phantom, a lie constructed on stolen pallets of electronics and borrowed time. And Savannah, Wyatt had seen her exactly once since the morning he forced her out. He had been driving past the Sunrise Cafe during the chaotic Sunday morning rush. Through the grease-stained plate glass window, he saw her. She wasn't wearing the hopeful, calculating smirk of a woman about to escape her life. She looked exhausted, hollowed out, her hair tied back in a messy knot as she frantically balanced 3 heavy trays of food. Word around the neighborhood was that she was living out of a cheap motel by the interstate, pulling double shifts just to keep a roof over her head, entirely stripped of the financial safety net Wyatt had broken his back to provide. He had exacted his revenge with surgical precision. He had protected his assets, destroyed his rival, and excised the parasite from his life. He was a free man. So why did it feel like he was the one serving a life sentence? Wyatt killed the truck's engine. The sudden absence of the mechanical hum made the quiet of the evening feel even more oppressive. He gripped the steering wheel, his calloused hands tracing the worn leather cover. He had spent 6 years working the graveyard shift, sacrificing his sleep, his joints, and his youth to build a life inside that tiny, run-down apartment. He had endured the grueling labor because he believed he was building a foundation for a family. Now, he was just a man sitting alone in the dark. The cold numbness that had sustained him through the meticulous planning and execution of his vengeance finally began to thaw, leaving behind a raw, agonizing ache in the center of his chest. He didn't miss Savannah. He missed the woman he thought she was. He missed the illusion of the life they were supposed to have. He missed the version of himself who believed that hard work and loyalty were enough to keep a home safe. Wyatt leaned his head back against the faded headrest. The streetlights flickered to life, casting long, lonely shadows across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. Slowly, uncontrollably, the tears he had held back for weeks began to fall. They were hot, silent, and heavy, tracking down his grease-stained cheeks and soaking into the collar of his canvas jacket. He sat in the cab of his truck and wept. He wept for the death of his marriage, for the 6 years of his life he could never reclaim, and for the hollow, echoing victory that tasted entirely of defeat. He had burned the house down to kill a rat, and now, There was nothing left but ash.